I was holding the speech I had prepared for my daughter as I stood at the rear of the room. I never had the opportunity to read it because of her. With crystal chandeliers, white flowers flowing down each arch, and laughter buzzing beneath the classical strings, the room was a luminous space. As the newlyweds danced, everyone turned, beaming and sparkling. Unnoticed, however, I stood in the back with a folded piece of paper securely in my palm. My speech, which I had spent the whole night honing, was filled with pride, love, and memories. Each word was picked with care. I pictured Jenna's eyes shining the way they used to when she was younger as I read it aloud, my voice quivering with delight. However, that time never arrived. I just noticed the final program on a table at the entrance. I hadn't been informed personally. There was no sign of my name. Still, I refrained from crying. As usual, I took a seat close to the rear and grinned. Gently, courteously, and imperceptibly. When everyone clapped, I did too. I took a taste of champagne. I had no desire to. When I felt like crying, I laughed. No one realized I was gradually fading out of the bride's tale, even though I was her mother. The quiet didn't stop there either. The phone rang later that evening when the lights had gone down and the music had stopped. My new son-in-law Grayson was there and he was weeping. Tell us where you're viewing from in the comments section. Before we begin, for more impactful tales, remember to like, share, and subscribe. My life felt complete before the wedding preparations, the phone call, and the lengthy time until I was given a program without my name on it. For 28 years, being Jenna's mother was my entire world. My name is Lorraine Voss. At the early age of 33, I became a widow after my husband Derek died of cancer. In upstate New York, we had recently purchased a small white cottage. It was ours, despite its drafty windows and uneven floors. I took up weekend tutoring jobs and worked extra shifts at the elementary school after Dad died away. There was nothing I could do. Jenna required braces, lunch money, and new shoes. She was unaware that I occasionally had bread for supper in order to allow her to attend every field trip. To be completely honest, I didn't want her to. That is the silent, unseen sacrifice that is love. I didn't miss any of her significant events. I witnessed her first tooth loss, her first heartbreak at the age of 16, and her acceptance into her top college pick. I folded every towel, labeled every box, and packed her dorm room as if I were sending a part of me away. "There's nothing you could ever do that would make me stop loving you," I said to her as I gave her a hug that day. I was once referred to be Jenna's safety net. In a high school essay, she said that I was her pillar of support and that I helped the house feel like a lighthouse in times of storm. For years, I read that essay at difficult times while carrying it in my wallet. By the time she graduated from college, it had become smeared with age. She relocated to the city for a fast-paced, lucrative, and prominent marketing career after graduating, even as she began to change into a person I hardly recognized, polished, pushed, and always exhausted. I was still very proud. She texted more and didn't come home as much. We started making monthly phone calls instead of weekly ones. Nevertheless, I reminded myself that this is what maturing looks like. She is independent, busy, and doing well. I brought her up for that. Every spring, the two of us would travel to places like Maine, Savannah, and once even California. 3 years ago, right before she met Grayson, we last did that. We watched old movies, slept at a bed and breakfast, and chatted about love, regret, and everything in between till 2 in the morning. "You're the reason I believe good people exist," she remarked, resting her head on my shoulder that evening. I trusted her. I felt elated when she met Grayson. He was stable, considerate, and compassionate. He was modest, even though he hailed from a wealthy family. In his presence, Jenna's smile softened. I recall our first meal together at a little Italian restaurant close to her apartment. She seemed to desire my approval as she continued to look at me. I willingly offered it. She asked me to assist her in planning when they announced their engagement. She remarked, "I want to feel timeless, like the love stories you read to me when I was a child." I started crying. This was my adult child in love and requesting my assistance in creating a fairy tale. I felt needed once more during those initial months of preparing. She would phone and inquire about song lists, color schemes, even the neckline of her dress. "You'll give a speech, of course," she even stated. "Everyone is anticipating it." That evening, I began writing it. The words came to me without my having to think about them. Her first ballet performance, the moment she held my hand at her father's death, and her first paycheck were all there. I could hardly contain the layers of pride, anguish, and love that filled the lines. But gradually, the exhilaration gave way to quiet. She stopped updating as often. She previously remarked, "Celeste believes blush pink is more elegant." Grayson's mother, Celeste, has a voice like glass and a set of unyielding beliefs. Celeste believes that less is more. The program is full, according to Celeste. Instead, Celeste suggested using a planner. I told myself I was being too sensitive and shrugged it off. I still had the speech, after all. Did I not still have that moment ahead of me? I remained the bride's mother, her pillar of support, and the person she referred to as her lighthouse. Right up until I opened the software, I kept telling myself that. On a Sunday afternoon, it took place. Jenna had asked me to join her and Celeste for breakfast at a hip rooftop eatery in the city. When I first arrived, I recall feeling a little out of place because of the glass walls, the servers' immaculate black aprons, and the background jazz humming. Everybody in my immediate vicinity was dressed as though they were featured on magazine covers. Derek had given me pearl earrings for our 5th anniversary, and I had worn my blue cardigan. Even before I sat down, I felt insignificant. Jenna smiled politely and waved me over. Celeste's eyes seldom left her phone. She sipped her mimosa as if it were a performance while sporting a soft gray pantsuit. "I'm so happy you could make it, Lorraine," she remarked, not in an unpleasant but nevertheless unwelcoming manner. I put my napkin over my lap like a schoolgirl. At a formal supper, nodded and sat down. Swatches, flower samples, and caterer brochures were already piled high on the table. I grabbed a piece of soft pink cloth, which Jenna would have loved as a child. "This is stunning," I remarked. "Remember that ballet outfit you wore in 5th grade? It makes me think of that." "The one with the bow made of satin?" Celeste interrupted, with a sharp chuckle. "Blossom tones are quite out of style. We're gravitating toward ivory and taupe. Elegant, understated." Jenna laughed. "You don't get modern weddings, Mom." For a longer time than necessary, the words lingered there. The way she said it, lightly, dismissively, as though my perspective was a little annoyance, was more important than what she said. I put the pink swatch back on the table and mustered a laugh. I had never felt so alienated around my daughter before. Later, when the waiter came to take our order, I asked if the omelet could be made without goat cheese. "It gives me headaches," I explained. Celeste smiled tightly. "You know, people only say that because they're not used to elevated ingredients." Jenna didn't defend me. She didn't even look up. I tried to stay present. I complimented Jenna's engagement ring, asked about the venue. I even offered to hand-make the guest favors, little sachets of lavender and chamomile, something I used to do for school fundraisers. Jenna looked at Celeste, then back at me. "That's really sweet, Mom," she said, "but we've actually hired someone for the favors. It's all part of the package." Package. I wasn't sure whether she meant the planner's package or the life package she was building, one where I no longer fit. That night, I sat on the train ride home, staring out the window, watching the city fade into trees and quiet. Neighborhoods. I replayed every moment of brunch, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Jenna was just stressed. Weddings are stressful. Mothers and daughters fight over centerpieces all the time. This was normal. This was nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something had shifted. The next weekend, I stopped by her apartment to drop off some old photos I thought she might want to use for the slideshow. Jenna in pigtails holding a turtle, Jenna in her graduation gown, Jenna asleep on my chest when she was barely 3 months old. Grayson greeted me with a hug. "She's just finishing a call," he said. I waited in the living room while voices drifted in from the other room. "No, I don't want the slideshow to be too sentimental," Jenna was saying. She paused. Then Celeste's voice. "Exactly. This day is about you. Don't let her hijack it." Grayson looked at me with wide eyes. I smiled at him, handed him the photo envelope, and said I had somewhere else to be. He tried to protest, but I was already at the door. As I walked down the hallway, I realized the red flag wasn't just a moment. It was a shift in the wind, subtle but certain. A new version of my daughter was taking shape, and I didn't recognize her. Worse, I wasn't sure she recognized me anymore. Still, I clung to hope. She was just under pressure, caught in someone else's expectations. She'd find her way back. That's what I told myself because I wasn't ready to face the truth that she was already gone. There wasn't one explosive moment where Jenna pushed me away. No screaming match, no dramatic door slam, just a quiet unraveling, thread by thread, moment by moment, until I couldn't recognize the relationship we once had. The wedding planning continued, but I wasn't really part of it anymore. I still received occasional updates, but they felt more like press releases than conversations. Short texts with emojis. Cake tasting today. Turned out so good. Or dress fitting next week. Can't wait. There was never a "do you want to come?" or "what do you think of this?" Not anymore. I tried to stay supportive. I left voicemails telling her how proud I was. I commented on every Instagram post with hearts and kind words. And still, I felt like a guest in her life, not her mother. One evening, I offered to host a small pre-wedding dinner at my home for Jenna's childhood friends, girls I'd known since they were 6 years old. I thought it would be a sweet, nostalgic way to remind her where she came from. Jenna hesitated. "That's sweet, Mom, but I think we're doing a wine tasting thing with Grayson's crew that weekend. I don't want to overwhelm the schedule." I bit back my disappointment. Of course, totally understand. But later that night, I looked at the casserole dish I'd pulled from storage, the one Jenna used to call the celebration pan, and I felt foolish. I put it back on the shelf without unwrapping the bubble wrap. Even Grayson started noticing. He'd call occasionally, always checking in with this soft guilt in his voice. "Hey, Lorraine, just wanted to see how you're holding up with all the wedding stuff." I could tell he meant well, but it also meant he could see the cracks forming, and that made them real. One afternoon, I dropped by Jenna's apartment with a framed photo I'd found of her father holding her as a baby. I thought she might want to display it at the wedding to honor the man who loved her with everything he had. She opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet, Mom, really. But we're trying to keep everything very sleek and modern. No old photos. It's just not the vibe we're going for." No old photos, no history, no father, no me, I thought. I stood there in the hallway, the frame heavy in my hands. "Maybe just at the welcome table," I said. "You don't even have to mention him, just so he's there in some way." Jenna's tone didn't shift. "I don't want to start that whole thing with Celeste. She already thinks we're too sentimental. Please, just trust me on this." I did trust her. I trusted that she'd changed. Later, as I walked back to my car, I realized I hadn't been invited to the bridal shower. I'd seen photos online, a perfectly curated event at some rooftop garden, everyone in matching cream outfits, sipping champagne with gold straws. Celeste was there, her friends were there, not me. No one said anything, no explanation, no apology. It was like they had forgotten I existed. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was being dramatic. But one morning, I was in the kitchen making tea, and I realized I hadn't spoken to Jenna in 2 full weeks. That had never happened before. When I finally did call her, she picked up with a rushed tone. "Hey, Mom, can I call you later? We're meeting with the planner and Grayson's parents." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Of course, just checking in." She didn't call back. I began to question everything. Was I being too clingy? Was I embarrassing her? Did I make some mistake I didn't know about? But every time I asked those questions, another memory of our closeness would surface. All the bedtime talks, the road trips, the birthday surprises. I had been a good mother. Not perfect, but good. This wasn't about me not being enough. This was about her choosing someone else's vision over her own past, and I was part of that past. One day, I found the speech draft on my nightstand and read it out loud. I didn't even get halfway through before I started crying. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the reminder that I had believed I mattered in her story. I had imagined my voice echoing in that wedding hall, filling it with love, memory, pride. Instead, I was becoming silent background noise, a page being turned, a chapter closed. It was the night before the wedding. The rehearsal dinner was held at a high-end vineyard just outside the city. Everything shimmered with elegance. Strings of lights woven through oak beams, candles flickering against glassware, servers gliding between guests with trays of bite-sized hors d'oeuvres. It should have been a night filled with joy, warmth, and the quiet magic that comes from seeing your child on the edge of a new chapter. Instead, it became the moment I realized, without a doubt, that I was no longer a part of her story. I arrived early, as I always do. I wore a soft green dress Jenna once complimented, the same one I'd worn to her college graduation. My hair was pinned in place, my hands a little shaky as I held the gift I'd brought. A simple locket with a photo of Derek and baby Jenna inside. I had planned to give it to her that night, a way for her father to be with her on the big day. I'd even added a small note. For something old, he would have been so proud. As guests trickled in, I stayed off to the side, watching her glide from table to table in a white silk dress that shimmered under the lights. She looked beautiful, radiant, glowing, but different. Her movements were practiced. Her laugh was just a little too loud. She seemed more like a hostess than a daughter. When she finally made her way to me, I opened my arms and she gave me a brief hug, more out of obligation than affection. "You look lovely," I said. "Thanks," she replied, her eyes already scanning the room. "I think the lighting turned out perfect." I held out the locket, carefully wrapped in a silver box. "Just a little something," I said. "Thought you might wear it tomorrow. It's your father and you remember that photo from the backyard?" She blinked, then smiled faintly. "Oh, Mom, that's really sweet. But I already have my accessories picked out. Celeste got me this diamond pendant that matches the earrings. You understand, right?" I nodded. "Of course." I slipped the box into my purse, trying not to let the rejection register on my face. And then came the part I'll never forget. Toward the end of the evening, the planner took the mic and began outlining the next day's schedule. "We'll start the ceremony at 4, followed by cocktail hour on the patio, and then we'll move into dinner and toasts." I sat up straighter. Toasts, my moment. Jenna had promised I'd be part of the speeches. I'd rehearsed every word of mine. It wasn't long, just a few minutes, a tribute to her journey, her father, her heart. I had imagined her holding my hand while I spoke, tears in her eyes, remembering who we had always been to each other. The planner continued, reading names from a list. First, the best man, Daniel Campbell, then the maid of honor, Shelby Ray. Then, Celeste Campbell will offer a few words on behalf of the family. I waited. My breath caught in my throat. There were no more names. Laughter rose from the crowd as the planner moved on, joking about the open bar and late-night dancing. I looked around. No one else noticed. No one else realized that something sacred had just been taken from me. I leaned toward Jenna, hoping this was some mistake. "You said I'd speak," I whispered. She didn't even look at me. "Mom, it just didn't fit. The schedule's really tight, and Celeste said it's better to keep things streamlined." My chest tightened. "So, I'm not giving a speech at all?" She gave me a soft shrug, eyes flicking away. "Don't make a thing out of it, please." I sat back slowly, feeling the sting rise from my stomach to my throat. My hands trembled. Under the table, I could barely hear the rest of the evening. Everything blurred into soft music and clinking glasses. Around me, people toasted and cheered and laughed. I smiled when I was expected to. I nodded when someone said, "You must be so proud." But inside, I was shrinking. After dessert, I slipped away to the restroom. I locked the stall door and sat there alone, clutching my speech in my purse. I didn't cry, not yet. I just stared at my knees and breathed quietly. I wasn't angry. I was erased. Tomorrow, my daughter would walk down the aisle. But tonight, she had already walked away from me and no one even noticed. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. The sky was a clean, unbroken blue, the air just cool enough to keep the guests comfortable. The venue was breathtaking. Rose gardens in full bloom, an old stone chapel with ivy trailing its arches, white chairs lined up like soldiers awaiting the start of something sacred. Everything looked like it belonged in a bridal magazine except me. I arrived quietly, 2 hours early, just as I had been instructed in the final timeline Jenna's planner had emailed out. No personal message, no warmth, just a name, Lorraine Voss, next to the words ceremony seating, second row, fair. Right. Not front row, not next to her, just there. I wore the soft blue dress I'd picked months ago. Jenna had once told me it brought out the color in my eyes. I held on to that memory as I walked through the parking lot alone, holding a small wrapped box under my arm. My wedding gift to her was a hand-sewn quilt with pieces of fabric from every place we had ever lived, every stage of her life stitched together. It was a legacy in thread, hours of my time poured into each square. I'd saved it for this day. As I approached the venue, I saw Celeste standing by the entrance, clipboard in hand. She glanced at me and smiled thinly. "Lorraine," she said, not quite with contempt, but with the chilly politeness of someone fulfilling an obligation. "Glad you made it." I nodded. Of course. No hug, no warmth, just another guest to manage. I found my seat quietly, just as the florists were finishing the final touches. I watched the bustle around me, photographers setting up, ushers adjusting bow ties, bridesmaids in pale mauve dresses giggling near the altar. Everyone had a place, a role, everyone except me. When Jenna emerged for photos, I felt my breath catch. She looked radiant, like a dream wrapped in lace and light. My heart swelled with love and grief all at once. I wanted to run to her, hold her, whisper how proud I was, how beautiful she looked, but she was surrounded. Celeste on one side, the maid of honor on the other, the photographer barking directions like a general. I waved. Jenna saw me, nodded briefly, and turned back to the camera. It was over in seconds. When the ceremony began, I took my seat as instructed. Second row, far right. I watched as Derek's absence was filled with a symbolic candle, lit by Celeste and Grayson's father. No mention of my late husband, no photo, no words, just a candle, generic and silent. I held my speech in my lap, even though I knew by then I would never get to read it. I had memorized it, after all. I whispered the lines in my head as the officiant spoke. From scraped knees to scholarship letters, I've watched you grow with awe and gratitude. You are and will always be the greatest chapter of my life. The words stuck in my throat. I blinked hard to keep the tears from spilling. No one noticed. No one turned to look. I was invisible. At the reception, I stayed until the first dance. I watched Jenna and Grayson twirl under the lights, their smiles practiced, their movements elegant. They were a beautiful couple, the kind of couple people envy. But all I could see was the little girl in pigtails who used to crawl into my bed. After a nightmare, the girl who used to hold my hand at every school assembly, the girl who once told me I was her home, and now she was building a new one without me in it. The DJ announced the parent dances. Jenna danced with Grayson's father. There was applause, laughter. Someone toasted with champagne. No mother-daughter dance, no speech, no mention. I slipped away during dessert. No one stopped me. I walked across the parking lot alone, the night air cooler now, my shoes crunching on gravel. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat in silence for a moment. Then I pulled the quilt from under my arm and placed it on the passenger seat. It smelled like lavender and cotton, like safety, like home. I drove home without turning on the radio. When I got there, I changed into my robe, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window with the speech resting on my lap. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not resentment. Something quieter, heavier. I had given her everything I had. My time, my love, my history. And now she had taken it all and built a life where I was simply omitted. The next morning, long before the champagne glasses were washed and the dance floor cleared, my phone rang. It was Grayson, and he was crying. The phone rang at 6:42 a.m. I was already awake, though I hadn't slept much. My body was tired, but my mind was stuck in loops, rewinding, replaying. Every smile I forced at the wedding, every time I swallowed a word I wanted to say, every tiny dismissal that had added up to a quiet, unspoken exile. When I saw Grayson's name on the screen, I hesitated. A part of me didn't want to answer. I wasn't ready to relive it, not yet, but I picked up. "Lorraine," he said, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize it would be like that." He paused, clearly trying to compose himself. I heard him exhale slowly, shakily. "She didn't even tell me you weren't speaking," he said. "She said you changed your mind, that you didn't want to." I leaned against the wall of my kitchen, staring at the cold cup of tea I'd abandoned hours earlier. "No," I said softly. "She just didn't include me." There was silence. Then Grayson said, almost in a whisper, "I'm so sorry." He started to say something else, but I told him I needed time. He understood. We hung up, and I stood there, still as stone, as the sun began to rise through the kitchen window. That day was the beginning of my unraveling. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I went through the motions, made breakfast, though I didn't eat it, folded laundry, though I didn't remember washing it. I sat in the living room with the TV on, volume low, not watching anything, and then it hit. Grief doesn't always show up the way you expect. It wasn't sobbing on the floor. It wasn't smashing plates or screaming into pillows. It was smaller, slower, a hollowing. I wandered into Jenna's old room, the one I had kept just as she'd left it after college. I sat on her old bed, picked up the worn-out teddy bear she used to carry everywhere as a child, and just stared at it. That's when the tears came. Quiet. At first, then deep, aching sobs that seemed to rise from a place I hadn't touched in years, not since her father died. That day, I let the pain wash over me. I grieved the daughter I raised, the girl who used to draw me handmade cards and tape them to the fridge, the girl who danced barefoot in the hallway while I clapped along, the girl who once cried in my lap when her favorite teacher moved away. I didn't know where that girl had gone. And maybe that was the cruelest part. She was still here, walking around in a wedding dress, smiling at cameras, but she'd buried every piece of me she used to love. I felt discarded, erased. I called my sister Francine, who lived 2 states away. She was one of the few people who knew how close Jenna and I used to be. When I told her what happened, she grew quiet. "That's not your failure, Lorraine," she said gently. "That's hers." But it didn't feel that simple. I couldn't stop wondering if I had pushed too hard, loved too loudly, tried to hold on too tightly. Maybe I should have let go earlier. Maybe I'd done something I hadn't realized. By that evening, I found myself sitting on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by old photo albums, Jenna's baby pictures, birthday parties, messy art projects, high school dances, me in every corner of her life, always there, always smiling. There was one photo I kept returning to, Jenna at 6 years old, grinning up at me as we carved pumpkins on the porch. Her hands were covered in seeds and pulp, and I was laughing, arms wrapped around her. I touched the image with my fingertips. Where did she go? And more importantly, who was I now that she didn't need me? That night, I didn't bother with dinner. I went to bed early, but sleep never came. Just the creaking of the house around me and the silence of a life suddenly too quiet. For decades, I had poured everything I had into being Jenna's mother. I had built my identity around it, my routines, my purpose, my pride. And in one weekend, all of it had been pushed aside. I lay in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. This was rock bottom, not just because of what she did, but because I didn't know who I was without her. 3 days after the wedding, the world outside continued as if nothing had changed. The mail still came, the neighbors still mowed their lawns. But inside my home, time moved differently. Slower, heavier. The walls felt closer, my chest tighter. I had barely left the house since returning from the wedding. I hadn't unpacked the overnight bag I'd brought. It still sat by the front door, zipped up like it didn't want to remember either. The quilt, my wedding gift to Jenna, remained on the dining room table, unopened, unwanted. I hadn't touched it since I'd placed it there. It was the quiet center of everything I hadn't said. On the fourth morning, just as I sat down to drink the tea I'd let grow cold for the third time, I heard a knock at the front door. Not the hurried rap of a delivery driver, not the impatient pound of someone expecting to be let in. Just 3 soft knocks, measured and unsure. I opened it to find no one there. But on the welcome mat was a bouquet of pale blue hydrangeas, Jenna's childhood favorite, wrapped in brown paper. Tucked inside was a small, cream-colored envelope with my name written in neat handwriting. Lorraine. My heart skipped. It wasn't Jenna's handwriting. I brought the bouquet inside and set it on the table, hands trembling as I opened the envelope. The note was short. Lorraine, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, not after what happened. But I need to talk. There are things I didn't know, things Jenna hid from me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a conversation. Please, Grayson. I stared at the words, reading them once, twice, then a third time. She hid something. What could she possibly hide from the man she married? For a moment, I considered throwing the letter away. What good would it do to reopen wounds that had barely begun to scab over? But something inside me stirred. Not anger, not hope, just curiosity. I sat at the table, staring at the letter while the soft scent of hydrangeas filled the room. That smell took me back to the spring Jenna turned 8, when we planted a bush of them in the backyard. She'd check every day to see if they'd bloomed, squealing when the first petals appeared. That summer, she picked one and put it behind my ear. Now you're a flower too, Mama. I hadn't thought about that day in years. I called the number Grayson had written on the back of the note. He picked up on the second ring. Lorraine, he said quickly, as if he was afraid I'd hang up. Thank you for calling. I haven't said anything yet, I replied, my voice even. There was a pause. Then, can I come by? I'd rather say this in person. An hour later, he was sitting across from me at the same dining table where I'd once helped Jenna with her college applications. He looked tired, more tired than a man newly married should look. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. He told me everything, how Jenna had been battling insecurities for years, shame about her modest background, fear of being seen as less than in Grayson's elite social circle, how Celeste had fed those fears like gasoline on a fire, how Jenna had gradually rewritten her past, leaving out the messy, human parts, including me. She said your involvement would make the wedding feel too emotional, Grayson said. She wanted it polished, perfect, marketable. I flinched. She was terrified of seeming small, Lorraine, he said softly. But in doing that, she made you small, and that's not right. He pulled something from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was a printed version of the wedding program, but this one had my name, Speech, Lorraine Voss, mother of the bride. I found this in an older file the planner had saved, he said. You were supposed to speak originally, but 3 weeks before the wedding, she had them remove you. I stared at the page, my name printed clearly, sandwiched between strangers, who were allowed to stay. Grayson looked me in the eye. I don't expect you to forgive her, but I needed you to know. It wasn't your fault. He stood to leave, hesitated, then added, You raised someone who's still figuring herself out. I just hope it's not too late for her to remember who she was before all this. After he left, I sat with the program in my lap, my fingers tracing the edge of my name. It was proof. Not just that I had been forgotten, but that I had once been remembered. And that changed something in me. Maybe I hadn't failed. Maybe the story wasn't over yet. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. It wasn't because anything had been fixed. Not really. Jenna hadn't called. She hadn't apologized. My name still hadn't been spoken during her wedding reception. But knowing the truth, holding that wedding program in my hands, changed something inside me. Like a door I hadn't realized was locked had quietly creaked open. Grayson's words echoed in my head. You raised someone who's still figuring herself out. For so long, I had carried the blame, tucked it deep into my bones the way mothers do. I thought maybe I had loved her too tightly, expected too much, said the wrong things. I thought my presence had been a burden. But it wasn't about me being too much. It was about Jenna thinking she had to be less of herself to be more for someone else. The realization came slowly like a sunrise. Nothing dramatic, just steady light bleeding into the corners of my understanding. For the first time in weeks, I didn't spend the morning lost in what-ifs or rewriting conversations in my head. I didn't reread the speech or check my phone for messages that never came. Instead, I opened the windows, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and made a real breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast with apricot jam. I even played music, that old Norah Jones CD Jenna and I used to listen to on long drives. I cleaned the living room, not out of obligation or boredom, but because I wanted to. I dusted off old picture frames, wiped down the bookshelves, even repotted a plant that had been dying in the corner. As I worked, I noticed something strange, a quiet contentment, like I was beginning to take up space in my own life again. And then, without really thinking, I took the quilt I had made for Jenna off the dining table and folded it gently. I placed it in a storage bin, not with bitterness, but with peace. I didn't need to keep it out as a reminder of what she'd rejected. I knew what I had created. I knew the care that went into every stitch. It didn't need to prove anything anymore. That afternoon, I took a walk to the park. The air was cool, but the sun was warm, and families were out enjoying the day. I sat on a bench near the duck pond where Jenna used to feed breadcrumbs as a child. I remembered how she used to name the ducks, give them stories and personalities. She had such imagination then, such softness. Maybe that softness was still in her, buried under pressure and image and the fear of not being enough in the eyes of people like Celeste. I couldn't drag her back to who she used to be, but I also didn't have to stay frozen in who I used to be. That night, I dug out my travel journal from the back of the closet. It was something Derek and I had started years ago, back when we thought retirement would be filled with road trips and long weekends by the coast. We had written down places we wanted to visit: Seattle in the fall, Charleston in the spring, Santa Fe for the art festivals. Most of them we never got to see, but I was still here. The next morning, I booked a trip to Santa Fe 1 week, a little Airbnb near the plaza, close to galleries and coffee shops. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't feel the need to announce it. It wasn't a statement. It was a step, not away from Jenna, but toward myself. For the first time in years, I felt something flicker inside me, not just relief or calm, but quiet, power, a fire that didn't burn hot or loud, but steady, undeniable. Jenna may not have seen me on her wedding day, but I was starting to see myself again. And I realized maybe that was the first thing I needed. Not a speech, not a seat at the table, just permission from myself to be more than someone's mother, to be Lorraine again. After years of putting Jenna at the center of everything, my schedule, my thoughts, my identity, I began placing myself quietly at the center instead. Not in loud, sweeping gestures. There were no dramatic declarations or ultimatums, just small, intentional choices, gentle shifts that made the ground feel more solid beneath my feet again. I didn't call Jenna. I didn't send her photos from the Santa Fe trip. I didn't reach out to ask if she'd changed her mind, if she'd reread the speech I'd written or opened the quilt I'd made. That part of me, the part that waited for permission to be seen, had gone still. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Instead, I focused on rebuilding the parts of my life that had gone neglected. First came the finances. I reviewed the trust Derek had left, checked the accounts, and scheduled an appointment with a new estate planner. The old will had Jenna listed as sole executor, inheritor, medical proxy. I quietly changed it, not out of vengeance, but because it was no longer a given. She had chosen a version of her life that didn't include me. I needed to make peace with that and plan accordingly. Then came the house. I had lived in that house for 31 years. Every hallway held memories: baby footprints in paint, height markings on door frames, echoing teenage arguments behind closed doors. But I began to see the house for what it was now, a space filled with what used to be. I started decluttering, not to erase but to release. I sorted through closets, boxed up Jenna's old things, and donated what I could. Her prom dress, still preserved in plastic, college textbooks, trophies, childhood drawings. I kept a few. The handmade birthday cards she wrote when she was 9, the journal entry where she called me the strongest woman I know. Those I placed in a small cedar box and tucked into the back of my own closet. Everything else, I let go. And as I let go, space returned, in the rooms and in me. I repainted the kitchen walls, finally replacing the fading yellow Jenna had picked out as a teenager with a warm terracotta. I filled the guest room with new linens, fresh flowers. I planted lavender and rosemary in the garden instead of the hydrangeas. They needed too much tending. I didn't want to tend anymore. I wanted to bloom. On weekends, I joined a local book club, something I'd always meant to do but never found time for. The women there didn't know me as Jenna's mother. They knew me as Lorraine, a retired teacher who loved mystery novels, and chai lattes and laughed too loudly at the wrong parts of movies. It felt good, even strange, to be seen for myself again. I began writing again, too. Not speeches, not letters, just little stories, things I scribbled in the margins of old notebooks or typed late at night while the house was quiet. I didn't have an audience, but I wrote anyway because I wanted to, because I could. The silent setup wasn't a plan for revenge. It wasn't a strategy to earn Jenna's remorse or make her feel guilty. It was something else entirely. A reclaiming, return to self. I still loved her. Of course I did. That love hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape. It no longer needed her approval or acknowledgement to survive. It lived in me, just as it always had. Quiet, strong, undeniable. There were moments when I missed her terribly. Moments when I'd hear a song we used to sing in the car, or see a mother and daughter shopping for wedding dresses and feel a familiar ache. But the ache didn't control me anymore. And every time I started to drift back into the habit of hoping for her call or replaying that moment at the wedding, I would take a breath and return to what I had built. A life. My life. One morning, as I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one that says, "Brave women raise brave women," I realized something. Maybe this quiet reclaiming wasn't just about finding myself. Maybe it was about modeling something else for Jenna too. Not a plea, not a guilt trip, but an example. A blueprint for how to walk away from what breaks you and build something stronger in its place, even if no one notices, even if no one claps, even if you do it all in silence. It started subtly, like the way a tide pulls back before the wave. I wasn't expecting change. I had stopped waiting for it. After the quiet transformation of my days, the reclaiming of my space, I had finally let go of the hope that Jenna would see me differently. My love for her remained, but it no longer clung to the dream of who she used to be or who I wanted her to become. I was no longer holding the door open, but life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It began with Grayson. He called every few weeks, not just out of obligation, but with genuine curiosity, even warmth. He asked how I was doing, what books I was reading, where I had traveled recently. After I mentioned the lavender I'd planted, he mailed me a small tin of hand cream made with lavender oil. "For your garden hands," the note read. "I know you've earned them." Then one afternoon he called and said something I hadn't expected. "I think she misses you. She just doesn't know how to admit it." I didn't say anything. "She talks about you when she thinks I'm not listening," he continued. "She still doesn't open the quilt box, but she keeps it in her closet." I checked. I felt something shift, small and quiet, but it didn't consume me. I thanked him for calling, and we hung up. The next change came through Jenna's old friend, Marisol. We hadn't spoken in years. She was one of the girls I used to carpool to school and sleepovers, one of the few people who had seen the bond Jenna and I once shared. She messaged me on Facebook. "Hi, Miss Voss. I hope this isn't too forward, but I saw the wedding photos and I just wanted to say I noticed. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that." I read the message twice before replying, then typed back a simple, "Thank you." She responded again, "Jenna used to call you her best friend. She still needs you, even if she's pretending she doesn't." That phrase lingered. One morning, while sipping coffee and watching the light creep through the blinds, I thought, back to the many times I'd let myself shrink to make others more comfortable. I had done it my whole life, in meetings, in friendships, in motherhood. But something had changed now, not just in my routine, but in the energy that surrounded me. I had drawn new boundaries, not with force, but with grace. And those boundaries had begun to speak for themselves. It was clear the dynamic had shifted. Grayson's calls became more frequent. When he and Jenna had dinner at Celeste's, he would message me afterward with updates. "Your daughter shut down one of Celeste's snide comments tonight," he wrote once. "She actually said, 'Don't talk about my mother like that. You'd have been proud.'" And I was, not because Jenna defended me, but because she had finally remembered that I was worth defending. I never asked for apologies or explanations. I didn't seek credit or closure. I simply kept building my life, one day at a time. And my silence became its own kind of power. Not cold, not punishing, just steady. A quiet reminder of who I was before anyone made me doubt it. That power showed itself in other ways, too. At the estate planner's office, when I was asked who I wanted to list as my medical proxy, I chose my niece Claire, a thoughtful young woman who had always treated me with care and respect. I didn't choose Jenna out of spite. I chose someone who had shown up. When I posted a photo of my Santa Fe trip on social media, I included a caption that simply said, "I used to wait to be included, now I go." It was shared by a few friends, commented on by several more. I never mentioned Jenna. I didn't need to. My life began to fill up, not with noise, but with meaning. And as I lived fully without performing for anyone, the balance quietly tilted. Jenna wasn't in control anymore. Not of my happiness, not of my presence, not of the story I tell myself about who I am. She had taken her step into adulthood, but I had taken my step into freedom. And slowly, the world around me began to reflect that truth. People saw me not as a forgotten mother or a discarded guest at a wedding, but as a woman who had rebuilt her dignity, brick by brick, without asking for permission. The tide had turned, and I was standing tall when it did. It happened nearly 3 months after the wedding, a soft spring morning, the kind where the wind carries the scent of lilac and the light feels warmer than it should. I was out in the garden, trimming back the lavender, when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A car door slammed, followed by hesitant footsteps up the front path. When I turned around, Jenna was standing at the gate. She looked thinner, tired, like someone who had been trying too hard for too long. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her heels impractical for the dirt path. But her eyes were softer than they had been in months, maybe years. I didn't speak. Neither did she. I stood still, the shears in my hand, the scent of crushed rosemary in the air between us. She opened the gate and walked toward me slowly, stopping just a few feet away. Her eyes flicked to the garden, then to the house, then finally met mine. "I didn't know how to call," she said. I said nothing. I didn't need to. She was here. That was already louder than any voicemail. She took a deep breath, like she'd been holding it for years. "I messed up," she said. "Not just the speech, all of it." She paused. "I let Celeste convince me that you were too emotional, too sentimental, that having you involved would make me look weak. A leaf fell between us. I told myself you'd understand, that you'd forgive me like you always do. But when I didn't see you at the reception, when I realized you'd left..." Her voice broke. I knew I'd gone too far. Still, I waited. She reached into her bag and pulled something out, a wrinkled piece of folded paper. "I found this on my dresser the morning after the wedding," she said. "Grayson said you never gave the speech, but I read it." I hadn't even realized I'd left a copy behind. I must have placed it there in my days before walking out that night, clinging to a final thread of hope. She unfolded it slowly. "I read it 3 times, she whispered. "I cried all 3. A lump rose in my throat, but I stayed still. I remembered things I hadn't thought about in years. The Halloween costumes, the road trips, the late nights with math homework. You were always there, every moment. And I erased you." I finally spoke, my voice calm but unwavering. "You didn't erase me, Jenna. You tried to, but I was never gone. She looked up, startled. I've been here always. You just stopped looking. Silence stretched between us. Not cold, not angry, just real. I didn't know how to come back from it, she said. I thought if I ignored it long enough, it would go away, but it didn't. I nodded slowly. Some things stay, Jenna, whether we name them or not. She nodded too. You were right to walk away. I didn't walk away, I corrected. I walked home. She swallowed hard. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said honestly. But I'm still your mother. That doesn't go away either. She looked down at the ground as if bracing herself for the final blow. But it didn't come because I didn't come to this moment looking for revenge. I came with clarity. I wiped my hands on my gardening apron and motioned toward the bench under the plum tree. Sit, if you'd like. The air smells nice this morning. She followed me wordlessly. We sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching a pair of bluebirds flit between the branches. It wasn't an apology wrapped in tears. It wasn't a dramatic reunion with violins swelling in the background. It was something better. It was honest. After a while, Jenna reached into her bag again and pulled out a small, familiar bundle. The quilt, still folded, still wrapped in the tissue I had used months ago. I brought it home, she said quietly, but I couldn't open it, not until I'd faced you. She placed it gently in my lap. Can we open it together? I nodded, unfolding the fabric slowly. The colors bloomed like memories between us. The patch from her childhood blanket, the fabric from Derek's old flannel shirt, the corner embroidered with her name and mine. She traced it with her finger, her breath hitching. I forgot who I was, she whispered. No, I said. You just stopped listening. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I'm listening now. And for the first time in a long while, I believed her. 2 weeks passed after Jenna's visit. We didn't speak every day. There were no long emotional phone calls or marathon lunches filled with apologies, but something between us had shifted. Not back to what it used to be, but into something new. Something more honest. She sent a photo of the quilt folded neatly at the foot of their bed. No caption, just the image. It said enough. Still, I kept my distance, not out of anger, but because I had learned how to live in my own space, how to breathe without waiting for someone else to make room. And then one morning, I received a letter, not a call, not a text, a formal embossed envelope with a return address I recognized instantly. Celeste Campbell. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring in from the east-facing window, and stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. My fingers didn't shake, my heart didn't pound. I was steady. Inside was a folded sheet of fine stationery, written in that same precise, icy cursive Celeste had always used, like every word had been practiced. Lorraine, it read. I believe tensions surrounding the wedding created unnecessary misunderstandings. It is my hope that, for Jenna and Grayson's sake, we can reestablish civility between us. I am hosting a formal spring brunch next Sunday and would like to extend the invitation to you as Jenna's mother. It will be attended by family and close friends. Let's put the past behind us and move forward in a spirit of grace. Celeste. I read it twice. Civility, misunderstandings. She hadn't mentioned my name once in public. Not at the wedding, not during the toasts, not when she had Jenna scrub me from the program, from the seating arrangements, from the memory of the day itself. And now, weeks later, she wanted grace. What she wanted was image repair. I walked over to the secretary desk in the corner of the living room and opened the drawer where I kept stationery. The real kind, not email, not text messages, a place for words that mattered. I selected a cream, envelope and a pen that flowed easily. Then I sat down at the dining room table, the same place where Jenna and I had once made place cards for her 5th grade Thanksgiving play. I didn't need to write much. Celeste, I wrote. Thank you for your invitation. I won't be attending. Jenna and I are rebuilding something meaningful, Not for appearances, not for brunches, and certainly not for the comfort of those who once encouraged her to forget who she is. You asked for grace. Grace begins with accountability. You've shown neither. Warmly, Lorraine Voss. I sealed the envelope, wrote her name across the front, and mailed it the same day. I didn't tell Jenna. This was a matter between women. But life has a way of unfolding truth, even when we try to keep it quiet. That same day, I mailed the envelope after sealing it and writing her name on the front. I kept it from Jenna. It was a woman-to-woman issue. Even when we attempt to hide the truth to ourselves, life has a way of revealing it. Grayson gave me a call the next week. He sounded astonished. "What did you write to Celeste, Lorraine?" he said. I informed him. He let out a breath into the phone. "I don't know whether you know, but Jenna learned about the brunch and the letter. Celeste apparently informed her that you graciously rejected. Jenna requested to view the correspondence. Celeste declined. Jenna then located and examined the envelope you sent after searching through the outgoing mail." I gasped. With a tone that seemed almost impressed, Grayson went on. "She departed after packing a suitcase. Told Celeste that until she apologized. To you, not to Jenna, not to me, but to you, she would not talk to her again." I remained silent for a while, allowing the words to settle like dust. "You should be proud, Lorraine," he continued more subtly. "Not only did you raise a strong lady, but you also taught her how to be one." I was knocked on the door later that week. With her hair in an untidy bun and little makeup, Jenna stood there with a bottle of wine and a grocery bag. She remarked, "I thought maybe we could cook like we used to." Yes, we did. As a child, we prepared lemon chicken and roasted veggies the manner she liked. She laid the table, and I lighted the rose-shaped candle that used to make her roll her eyes when she was 14. She remarked, "I read your letter to Celeste during supper." I raised my head. "Being your daughter makes me more proud than ever." I grinned. I answered, "You regained your ability to listen. That's what counts." Jenna grabbed my hand from across the table. This was not retaliation. This was not retaliation. This was justice, long-lasting but not loud. And lastly mine. And lastly mine. After the supper, Jenna started coming more frequently. Not daily, not in grandiose ways, but in quiet, regular ways. She would contact me for my chicken pot pie recipe, the way you used to make it when I was sick, or stop by on Saturday, afternoons with freshly baked bread from the market. She made no attempt to undo what had occurred. I was really startled by it. She didn't pretend the wedding hadn't caused a rift or over-apologize. Rather, she confronted the harm with presence, effort, and a readiness to endure suffering. She remarked, "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way things were?" When we were folding clothes together one morning, a simple, foolish task. I gazed at this lady who had been a girl once, who had constructed pillow forts in my living room, who had written my name between stick figure hearts, and who had forgotten me on the most significant day of her life. "No," I muttered, "but I'd rather not return." Uncertain if she was harmed, her eyes widened. I grinned. "I wish to proceed. I want us to start again from where we are right now, not from remorse or memories. I'm no longer simply your shadow, and you're not the same girl you once were." Slowly, she nodded. "All right." Soon after that discussion, Jenna began treatment. She claimed to want to know why she felt the need to rewrite her history, minimize her past, and fit it into a mold that had never been hers. For the sole purpose of listening, she even invited me to attend one of her sessions. I did, and I saw my daughter take responsibility, not carry it out, for the first time. She posed inquiries. She paid attention. When I informed her that I had sobbed in the restroom at her rehearsal dinner, she didn't interrupt. "You deserved better," she murmured, wiping her eyes. It wasn't a straight path of mending. There were weeks when we didn't speak much. Occasionally, she would send a picture of her meal or a meme that brought back memories of our previous road trips. At other times, she would phone me in tears following a challenging discussion with Celeste, who had yet to offer an apology. However, I no longer resided in Jenna's love waiting room. That was the distinction. And gradually, our relationship evolved into something new, not the intense intimacy of her early years, nor the pain of her quiet, but a steady, peaceful friendship that had been tried, broken, and repaired on more solid foundations. Then she came over one late summer day with a little envelope and a kind grin. A blurry black and white sonogram picture was within. She stated, "I couldn't imagine telling anyone before I told you, but I wasn't sure how to tell you." I gazed at the picture, exquisite and hazy. "I'm afraid," she said. "I am unsure of the type of mother I will be." "You'll be the kind who remembers, and that's enough," I murmured, reaching across the distance between us and lightly touching her hand. The world moved quietly about us as we sat on the porch together, listening to the wind rustle the trees. I was no longer required to deliver a speech. I was able to demonstrate my importance without a spotlight, applause, or microphone. I had completely and silently recreated a life that was mine. And she had returned. Not because I pleaded, but because I had made the decision to stand up for myself and quit pleading. After Jenna departed that evening, I went to my garden and cut off one lavender sprig. I went to the edge of the yard to Derek's gravestone, put it in the vase, and took a seat. "She is gaining knowledge," I muttered, "and so am I." As the day came to an end, the sky became pink. I closed my eyes because I felt at peace for the first time in a long time, not because I was done. The following week, I received a call from Grayson. He sounded stunned. "Lorraine," he said, "what did you write to Celeste?" I told him. He exhaled into the phone. "Well, I'm not sure if you know this, but Jenna found out about the letter and the brunch. Apparently, Celeste told her you politely declined. Jenna asked to see the letter. Celeste refused. So Jenna dug through the outgoing mail, found the envelope you'd sent, and read it." My breath caught. Grayson continued, his voice almost impressed. "She packed a bag and left. Told Celeste she wouldn't speak to her again until she apologized. To you, not me, not Jenna, you." For a long moment, I said nothing, just let the words settle like dust. "Lorraine," he said more softly, "you should be proud. You didn't just raise a strong woman, you reminded her how to be one." Later that week, I received a knock at the door. Jenna stood there, no makeup, hair in a messy bun, holding a grocery bag and a bottle of wine. "I thought maybe we could cook," she said, "like we used to." We did. We made lemon chicken and roasted vegetables, the way she liked it growing up. She set the table, and I lit the candle she used to roll her eyes at when she was 14, the one shaped like a rose. "Over. Dinner," she said. "I read your letter to Celeste." I looked up. "I've never been more proud to be your daughter." I smiled. "You remembered how to listen," I said. "That's what matters." Jenna reached across the table and took my hand. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't payback. This was justice. Not loud, but lasting. And finally, mine. Jenna began visiting more often after the dinner. Not every day, not in sweeping gestures, but in quiet, consistent ways. She'd drop by on Saturday afternoons with fresh bread from the market or text me asking for my chicken pot pie recipe, the way you used to make it when I was sick. She didn't try to erase what had happened. That was what surprised me most. She didn't over-apologize or pretend the wedding hadn't created a fracture. Instead, she met the damage head-on with presence, with effort, and with a willingness to sit in discomfort. One morning, we were folding laundry together, a small, silly thing, when she paused and asked, "Do you think we'll ever get back to the way things were?" I looked at her. This woman who was once a girl who built pillow forts in my living room, who scribbled my name next to stick figure hearts, who forgot me in the middle of the most important day of her life. "No," I said softly. "But I don't want to go back." Her eyes widened, unsure whether to be hurt. I smiled. "I want to go forward. I want us to build something new. Not out of guilt or memories, but from where we are now. You're not the girl you used to be, and I'm not just your shadow anymore." She nodded slowly. "Okay." Jenna started therapy shortly after that conversation. She said she wanted to understand why she felt the need to shrink her past, to reinvent her history, to fit a mold that was never hers. She even invited me to join one of her sessions just to listen. I did, and for the first time, I watched my daughter take accountability, not perform it. She asked questions. She listened. She didn't interrupt when I told her how I had cried in the bathroom stall at her rehearsal dinner. She wiped her eyes and said, You deserved better. The healing wasn't linear. Some weeks we didn't talk much. Sometimes she'd send a photo of her dinner or a meme that reminded her of our old road trips. Other times, she'd call, me crying after a difficult conversation with Celeste, who still hadn't apologized. But I no longer lived in the waiting room of Jenna's love. That was the difference. And slowly, our bond became something new. Not the all-consuming closeness of her childhood, not the ache of her silence, but a steady, quiet companionship, one that had been tested, fractured, and mended on stronger ground. Then, one late summer afternoon, she stopped by with a soft smile and a small envelope. Inside was a photo, a grainy black and white sonogram. I wasn't sure how to tell you, she said, but I couldn't imagine telling anyone before I told you. I looked at the image, blurry and perfect. I'm scared, she whispered. I don't know what kind of mother I'll be. I reached across the space between us, touched her hand gently, and said, You'll be the kind who remembers, and that's enough. We sat on the porch together, the wind rustling the trees, the world moving softly around us. I didn't need to give a speech anymore. I didn't need a microphone or applause or a spotlight to prove I mattered. I had rebuilt a life that was mine, wholly and quietly. And she had come back, not because I begged, but because I had stopped begging, because I had chosen myself. That night, after Jenna left, I went to my garden and clipped a single sprig of lavender. I walked to Derek's headstone at the edge of the yard, tucked it into the vase, and sat down. She's learning, I whispered, and I am too. The sky was pink with the last light of day. I closed my eyes, not because I was finished, but because, for the first time in a long time, I was at peace. Peace.